Recording. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. It's actually really nice to see so many of you, even though it's via Zoom. I'm Mayor Schulman with the Hartford Foundation's Nonprofit Support Program, and I want to welcome you all today to today's session on navigating change and building resilience through self-care, which is something I think many of us can use these days. Our facilitators for today will be leading another session, which will be aimed specifically at executive directors and CEOs of nonprofits on January 19th from 9 to 10:30 a.m. And that session will be on the role of staff care. Excuse me, just my screen is bouncing around, on the role of staff care in effective leadership. And invitations for that session will be sent out shortly, so be on the lookout for that. As we mentioned in the invitation, this is meant to be an interactive session. There will be breakout groups, which will allow you to share your ideas and your challenges with each other. So please keep your cameras on to the extent that that's possible. I always say that Zoom sessions are a team sport. So special thanks as always to my terrific NSP colleagues, Betsy Johnson and Monica Kelly, for all their behind the scenes assistance and teamwork in planning for today's session. And since it's a question that pretty much always comes up, we will be sharing the session recording as well as the slides with all of you following today's session, but we will not be recording the breakout group discussions because we want you to feel free to speak openly during those discussions. Betsy will be posting the survey for this session in the chat towards the end, so please do take a few minutes to complete it. And we really do value your feedback. We read all the comments and we often make changes based on your feedback. So I'm delighted that our facilitators today are Stacy Watson and Alicia Davis of Transformative Leadership Strategies, whose mission is to support leaders. Stacy started her career as a counselor, working with individuals and couples. And over time, she transitioned into corporate leadership roles. And she's worked extensively, excuse me, she's worked extensively with teams that are quite diverse in terms of function, culture, and geography. Alicia has over 30 years of leadership experience in healthcare, insurance, nonprofit, corporate, and engineering settings. She provides coaching to individuals, executives, teams, and boards. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Stacy and Alicia.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, welcome everyone. Happy Wednesday afternoon. We are so excited to be here with you. Thank you, Mayor, for inviting us and for your team and all of your support. And we are just thrilled. So you know, we usually do a little background of ourselves. You did such a great job, Mayor. You kind of threw me there for a minute. I'm like, okay, where do we start? We usually start with our background. So I'll just add that Stacy and I merged our coaching businesses together almost 4 years ago now, and we really focus in the nonprofit sector. And we have a big heart for people who have big hearts, and we love to support people who support people. And you know, this our session today around navigating change. I mean, change is continuous, and we have been riding the roller coaster of change over the last 2 years. And so just what does resilience mean, and how do we do self-care, and all of that is what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to do it through the lens of how can you put yourself first. And you know, we focus a lot on also just talking about how are we being while we're doing, right, Stace?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we find ourselves talking to folks such as yourselves, what we often find are people who, we call it, are hardwired with the caregiver DNA, you know, very focused on everyone else and other people. And that's wonderful. And I frankly believe it makes the world go round. And what we know is that it can also be exhausting. And what we're hearing as we're having conversations with leaders and teams and different organizations, especially in the nonprofit sector, is just folks are feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling burnout, it's been a long haul, and in some ways continues to feel like we're just kind of navigating all of this change. So we used to do most of our work in person, and I'm sure many of you can relate to that. And so now some of our work is back in person, which is great, and a lot of the work is still virtual. So we're excited to bring this topic because this one, among a series of others, really was formulated on the behest of our client organizations as we were really getting into the pandemic, saying we need to do something to support ourselves and our team. And I think navigating change is a theme that we're really struggling with. So this is sort of the roots of this particular topic, and we're excited to jump right in, right, Alicia?
Yeah, and so what we would love to know from you, I mean, we always really try to tailor the sessions to the group's needs, and we don't have time to go around and hear from everyone. And we would love to hear from a couple people, and we would really encourage you to use the chat as well, because we're both monitoring it, to really share with us what would be helpful for you to take away from today's session as we have this conversation about navigating change, as we talk about these ways that we can really cultivate inner strength and resilience. Like, what would be most helpful for you? And it might be a certain aspect of that. It might be just, if it's something for you, for your team, just a couple of thoughts about what would just make today really helpful and meaningful. So feel free. If you're on video, literally you can just raise your hand. If you want to use the reaction button and use the raise hand, feel free to do that. And type in the chat. So how about a couple shares? What would be helpful for today on this topic? You're taking an hour and a half out of your day, and it's precious time. So we want to make sure it's really meaningful. Anything in particular?
Someone had the nerve to come to our front door, so sorry for the dogs barking.
I'll just share since it's no one else is busting out with something to say, is just learning from other people, different ways to navigate, and what is working for other people, with the changes that are happening. It's been a long haul, so it doesn't feel like we're out of it. So that's it.
That's right. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, Karen.
I was just going to.
Go ahead, Richard.
So I was just going to say, so I think it's a combination, right, of being able to give ourselves the opportunities to feel how hard this has been, and frankly, how it seems to change day to day or week to week. It's not like a predictable series of change. It's a very unpredictable series. So being able to somehow be okay with that. And secondly, it may not be right on target with what you all are describing, but being able to deeply connect with the folks that we serve, because lives can be really different. Circumstances, experiences, challenges. When we talk about challenges, it can be really, really different. And I think being able to make that deeper connection and understanding of the folks we serve is an important part of this from my standpoint.
Thank you, Richard. One of the things that we, I literally just finished a call with one of our client organizations on recognizing and addressing burnout. And we were just talking about the impact of this pandemic on people's lives, people's of, who they have been supporting, their own lives, and just the layers and levels of trauma and the layers and levels of just real deep struggle and how to really get through that. So
can I just add just a little
yeah.
piece to that? Sorry, but and part of that is it can really be overwhelming to understand and to see how deep the challenge is and how much the sort of grief and tragedy can be for a lot of folks. So I think that's an important thing for all of us to be able to somehow come to terms with.
Yeah, you know what comes to mind as you say that, I think that's such an important point that you're making. And I think for those of us who tend to be fairly empathetic and very in tune with kind of those around us, certainly we can not be that we can become somewhat disconnected from our own experience, and we can be overwhelmed by the experience that others may be having. And so when we start to think about caring for ourselves, and I think that Karen put in the chat, you know, that it's easy to start to feel guilty. Like if I'm thinking about myself, think about all the need out there. And so I think that's something that we hear a lot in some of the organizations and the conversations that we have, is finding that balance between what do I need to sort of be able to continue to show up and build my capacity in ways that are helpful, and how do I also focus on others.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chris.
Please.
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking on what's already been said, it's the amount of discord that you have to deal with now that is so overwhelming. We're all in the giving field in some way, but it just feels like there's never a place that you turn that someone isn't needy. And it's that constant cycle of really trying to, you know, give a lot and take care of yourselves, but it's overwhelming. You know, I'm not a therapist, and I have hundreds of staff that all need something. And I feel like I need to have a full-time therapist on staff so that they get to be heard of non-work related issues that they're dealing with. And the mental health of our staff is probably the #1 issue. And it's really not COVID or how to deal with COVID. That's kind of becoming more, you know, more objectified. We know how to do certain things, but it's really just the amount of mental health stuff is overwhelming.
Yeah, it so is. Well, it seems to be a good jumping off point to kind of talk about sort of this reality that we're experiencing, which has to do with change. Because to the point you're making, Chris, you know, for a while, COVID felt like a brand new set of changes. And now we're sort of integrating that to some degree into our lives. And yet we're still surrounded by change. So, you know, this picture is really intended, I think, to just really normalize the experience that all of us have, or many of us have, when we think about how change affects us. Right, Alicia?
Yeah, and I think, you know, just as human beings, and the neuroscience behind this is that, you know, when change happens, we like to feel stability, we like to feel security. And when change comes up, our nervous system literally goes into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And we immediately try to protect ourselves. And what has happened over the last 2 years with the pandemic, on top of what you already do in terms of caring for populations that are, you know, really need a variety of services, what it means is that there's a kind of an initial reaction of resistance. And we've had this over such a long period of time that now Stacy and I, are seeing so much burnout. And burnout is very different than stress. You know, that initial response to change that we have, you know, and if you think back to the beginning in the pandemic or the beginning of any change, there's often a kind of a surge of that adrenaline and cortisol, and like we can get things done, and it might feel like a lot of pressure, but we're going to do it anyway. And yet, now what's happening is that people are really just going into a state of complete drain, mental and emotional, and that affects empathy, that affects our ability to connect with ourselves and with each other. And so, you know, I think this response to change, even now, like, you know, the new things coming out about COVID, it's almost like, oh yeah, now it's another thing, right? It's almost like next. So we can also get a little bit disconnected from what we need, and sometimes even perhaps from what other people need. What else, Stace? What else would you add to that?
Well, I think the other thing I would just mention is that, you know, I think when we've experienced change in the past, or perhaps, you know, to the point that was made earlier, you know, the change that has come with COVID has been so devastating for so many people that it can really create almost a trauma response when change occurs, you know, that we can really have not even just resistance, but a real challenged kind of experience with how do I navigate change when my experience of change has been negative or my experience of change has been really hard. So I think all of that sort of factors into why change is so challenging for so many people and why everyone's experience of change can be very nuanced and different. And as leaders, I think that can present even unique challenges within organizations. How can we support people in change when their response to change might not be uniform? Yeah.
That's right. And I mean, we also know whether it's about the pandemic, whether it's about you know, the kind of services that you're providing, legislation that's happening, just, you know, changes in staffing because of the staffing shortage, like change is always happening. It is always happening. And so part of what we want to explore today is change is inevitable. And the part that's optional is how do we grow through it? And how do we use change in a way that that we can really stay connected to our inner strength or our inner perspective that is supportive, right, Stace?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, you know, we're talking about navigating change and building resilience. And I think we can just, I mean, is it fair to say, would all of you on this call be okay if we just said there is a lot of that you and your teams are probably experiencing a fair amount of burnout, some level of mental and emotional exhaustion. What else, Stace? What are some other things that we're hearing a lot of? Anxiety and overwhelm.
I was going to say overwhelm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Stress, sort of difficulty in sort of envisioning how to keep moving forward, staffing issues that have created all sorts of constraints within organizations. Absolutely.
So anybody can, is that, how much does that resonate for folks? Raise a hand.
I saw
do the
some thumbs
up.
up and some head nods. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So what we really want to spend the time today talking about, I mean, this is the norm that is happening. What we really want to focus on today is, okay, how do we build our own inner strength, our own resilience in the face of all of this, right? And so we really want to first just speak to what the heck is resilience? How do we define it? And more importantly, how do you define it? So we would love to hear some of your thoughts about when we say the word resilience, what does that mean to you? And feel free, again, use the chat, raise a hand. We'd love to hear voices. So what does resilience mean to you?
Alicia, I think even before you asked that question, I think that Katie Hanley had her hand raised. Katie,
Oh,
did you?
great. Thank you, Mayor. Did not see Katie.
Hi, I was raising my hand to your earlier question to just affirm that all of those things that you were saying are right, but I'll answer this question too, which is what resiliency means to me is not that you're impervious to difficult times, but you can, like, it's hard and also you can do it, kind of thing. And that mindset that it's not that you have all the armor, it's just that you live through it and you keep going, and it's hard.
Yes. I love the and both of that, Katie. Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
I love Cynthia's comment, survival with grace. Love that, Cynthia.
Ooh, yes.
You might have to borrow that one.
That might be a new one. Ability to adapt and thrive, Yvette. We're going to talk about really the importance of adaptation for sure. Navigating change without being swayed off your focus and outcomes. Great. Might take a little detour, but coming back. Fantastic. Any other thoughts about what resilience means? So Stace, do we want to do a breakout room now and then talk about resilience, or shall we do the definition first and then go into the breakout room?
Yeah, let's do the definition first, and then we'll give everyone an opportunity to talk to a few other people about sort of an example of when they have demonstrated resilience. And frankly, the fact that we're all sitting on the call right now feels like it's a demonstration of resilience. But
Exactly.
Right.
Right. So this is, I don't know if any of you know this website. It's called HeartMath. So it is an organization, also a nonprofit, and they study the connection between neuroscience and what they call heart coherence. So the connection between our thoughts, our feelings, brain waves, and how literally what we think affects how we feel, and how we feel affects what we think, honestly. And we've looked at lots of definitions of resilience, and we really resonate with this one. And this definition starts with the capacity. And so the capacity to adapt. And so again, Yvette, adapt is one of the words that we use. The capacity to adapt successfully in the presence of risk and adversity. And so we just break that down a little bit. So capacity means that there is an ability to have a certain amount of something, a certain amount of fortitude, a certain amount of focus, a certain amount of emotional
Energy.
Right? Yes, beautiful. And so capacity can change moment to moment, day to day. And so this idea about resilience is that we kind of keep refueling the tanks, right? And Stacey, you want to just talk about the rest of it?
Well, right, because this gets really to what Katie's point was, I think, or at least what I heard from what you had to say, Katie, which is that it's our ability to do this adaptation while we are experiencing risk and adversity. So it's this sort of acknowledgement that we are going to have these moments in our lives that are hard potentially, that where there is challenge. And certainly we know change can be sort of a generator of those feelings of adversity and that experience of risk. So I think the idea here is just that even when we are experiencing those challenges, we are able to continue to maintain enough capacity to adapt successfully. And I think that's really what we want to spend a little bit of time, letting you talk about, is sort of what does that really mean to you, and perhaps even sharing an example of when you've been able to utilize that kind of approach in your life, because we've all done it. And I'm sort of being pretty serious. The fact that we're all here after the last 2 years we've had is really just a sign of resilience. And one of the things we talk to organizational leaders about all the time is we all may want to really consider, how are we acknowledging our organizational resilience? Because it's been a really hard road. And when you consider how organizations have pivoted, as we used over and over again last year, to be able to continue to provide services and supporting their communities, it's really remarkable. So resilience is something we all have a lot of experience with, but we're not always thinking about it.
Right. So how about we do the breakout rooms, and as Stacey said, in the breakout room, she'll set them up with probably 3 or 4 people.
Yep.
And just having a conversation about what does resilience mean to you, or even talking about just how do you when you're being resilient, like what are the strengths that you have, or how have you been able to be resilient over this last 2 years? So just remember. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had some really inspiring conversations about just examples of resilience that you have experienced and others have shared. So hope that was really great. Any shares from that conversation that you'd like to share with the larger group, or themes that came up in your conversation in your small groups? You can certainly put something in the chat, or
that's right,
just raise your hand, and we'd love to hear from any of the groups. Yes, Richard, please.
A couple of us connected to the idea of the ebb and flow and sort of the fleeting nature of a lot of this. sometimes feeling you're right on top of it, the water, and you're just going along, and sometimes the water's crashing on you and you don't have control. The ebb and flow, fleeting nature of this.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely. We had a hand up.
Narissa, was it Narissa? Where'd you go?
I don't know.
I'm
Marissa.
here. Sorry
you are.
about that. No,
That's okay.
I was going to share one of my colleagues, Ree, had shared like the importance of having like a group of kind of accountability partners in ensuring that check in regularly and ensure that you're engaging in self-care and kind of quizzing you on that, which I thought was a really helpful tool.
Yes. Yeah. It's like caring accountability partners, the kind of accountability partners that really do deeply care. That's amazing. Yeah. That really gets to that whole idea of connection, which is one that we're seeing over and over again, how important it is to be connected to ourselves and to other people who bring that kind of support to us. It's a great observation. Thanks, Marissa.
Great. Any other thoughts or themes that came out of your conversation around what it means to be resilient?
Our group spent a bit of time talking about the word capacity, right? How to recognize the different levels of capacity within your teams, right? Understanding that on any given day, everyone's capacity is at a different level, and really looking for ways to increase not only our own capacity, but help increase the capacity of others. So we spent a lot of time sort of on that word in particular in the definition.
Yeah, I'm curious. And is it Larissa or Larissa?
Larissa.
Larissa. I'm curious, Larissa, were there any strategies or approaches that you talked about?
My own acknowledgement was, right, with so many changes, the way that I'm used to refilling my own capacity or sort of reestablishing my capacity is to rely on the things that are static or stable in my life. But pandemic shifted not only work, but home and everything all at once. So that's made it tricky. So, you know, for me, it comes down to little things like taking a walk with the dog, right? And just getting out of my house and moving and being outside and then coming back and resetting. So, you know, finding little moments that may not be quite as expansive as I used to feel like I have, but sort of looking for those intentional moments.
Well, I don't know about you, Stace, but I think Larissa just literally, like you just shared, it was the perfect segue into what we want to explore here today, which is how do we increase capacity? Or, you know, to Richard's point, when we're ebbing and flowing, like sometimes we're in the flow, and to notice what is supporting us, and when we're in the ebb and we're, you know, maybe we don't have as much capacity, like what can we do both for ourselves as well as in connection with others, right, to refill. So Stacey, you want to start with this slide?
Well, I think,
and just
you
do a
know,
little conversation
often
here?
I know for many, many years thought about and probably talked about resilience as this idea of bouncing back. And I think the idea behind that language is just the idea that we continue to sort of put one foot in front of the other, even in the face of challenge. And as we were really researching this idea of resilience, as we were pulling this particular session together and just thinking about it sort of in personal ways, like what does it mean to us? There was this realization, or there is this realization, that we're never moving backwards. You know, we're always moving forward. And so it's really not about, and I think this is particularly helpful at times for me right now with Corona, because I feel like there's this idea that we're not probably ever going back to exactly the way things were before. And there's feelings associated with that, which are actual and true and real feelings that I experience. And how can we create sort of new ways of being together, new ways of celebrating holidays, new ways of working, like all these new ways. So it's this idea of how do I integrate this change into my life as opposed to sort of striving to go back to something that was, when in fact, that's really not a very realistic way that the world works, because time really only moves in one direction. And I think that's sort of the tricky part of this idea of resilience and sort of where we're bouncing, right?
Right. And, you know, we've said, I mean, how many times have we heard or have we said, you know, we can't wait to get back to normal, right? And language is really powerful. Like Brene Brown, we were just, I don't know how many of you, do any of you know Brene Brown and some of her work? So she just came out, Stacy and I have her new book and we're loving it. It's called Atlas of the Heart. And she, in that book, she talks about and defines different emotions that we have. And you know, one of the I think one of the things that we're just really experiencing a fair amount of right now is loss. And you know, so many feelings. And one of the things that she talks about in this book is that not only do our feelings come through and shape our language, but our language shapes our feelings. And so when we continuously kind of just get on this loop of, oh, when are we going to get back to normal? We're actually contributing or can be contributing to our own feeling of overwhelm or our own feeling of anxiety. So even really subtle language changes like, okay, so yes, here's the Omicron variant, or yes, I got to figure out how to go visit my son and our granddaughter safely in North Carolina. Okay, so this is where we're at today. What do I need to do to make sure that I'm safe, I'm well, my staff is safe, my staff is well, right? Whatever it is. So it can be just looking at the language that we're using too. And to also to just acknowledge that what we have been going through, even though initially it might have felt like a sprint, that really this is a marathon. And if we use that language or that metaphor because we think it fits really well, right, Stace?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if any of you are runners or joggers. I've done a little bit of it in my time. I certainly don't call myself a runner. And I think it's fairly well known that depending on the kind of race you might run, you would really prepare and support yourself differently. So you have Usain Bolt on the right of this picture, and he, at least at one point, was the fastest man in the world. That was kind of the slogan around him. And he was all about sprinting. So it's all about leaving it all on the track, you know, in that however many seconds it is to do that 100-meter dash. Whereas when you're thinking about this real experience that we've had these last 2 years, and really the much of the way that life is, there's a lot of marathon experience that we have. And so how do we acknowledge that we're in this kind of for the long haul? And so what do we need to do, to the point that folks were making, in it sounds like in your breakout rooms, around this idea of capacity and what does it mean and how do I support that? You know, even when one day I feel like I've got plenty of energy to keep running and then the next day not so much, right? So what is it that I need to do to recognize where my capacity is at any given time? And then what are some of the ways that I can support myself in refueling or sort of generating some of that capacity to support me as I keep moving forward, which is of course the way we're all moving. So I think that's sort of the metaphor of the sprinter versus the marathoner, is a little bit the way our lives often feel.
Right. And also, in addition to that, just also acknowledging that there needs to be time to renew. There needs to be recovery time. And I know that there are not often, sometimes in a day or a week, it doesn't feel like there might even be space for that. And I think part of what we just want to offer here is that there's not a magic bullet. Like we did a lot, we've done a fair amount of research, just really trying to understand how can we support leaders and their teams in being in getting through this really difficult time. And part of it is to be really understanding that we do need to have time and space for ourselves, even if it's a few minutes. And even if it's, even a little sporadic, that it matters. And so we can't say, okay, it's not about self-care anymore, because it really is more than ever about self-care. But it's more about what we hope, just as we're talking through this, is it's more about how do we offer ourselves intentional moments of time that can really help us hone in on improving our capacity. And this again, this model is from Heart Math, but if you look at it, it's a very holistic dimension, and holistic being looking at our physical bodies, right? Looking at how are we moving? How are we, so many of us now are we're sitting in front of screens. We maybe maybe we're not getting outside as often as we have in the past. So just noticing, like, what do our bodies need? Noticing, and this I think is really specific to long periods of high stress that begin to really go into the burnout mode, that it is very impactful mentally and emotionally. And Richard, you were talking about this earlier. Do you want to kind of speak to this, Stace, those two dimensions of resilience?
Well, I think, often when we talk about self-care, and I'm still striving to think of a new way to say that. So if anyone has any great ideas, because I often feel like self-care starts to feel like one more thing to put on my to-do list. And as Alicia said, what we know to be true, it is paying attention to ourselves in really meaningful ways that matters. And the research is abundantly clear on this. And often we think physical first. That seems to be the thing that pops in most of our minds. So we think about how much exercise are we getting? What are we eating? How much are we sleeping? Those types of things. What maybe we're not as connected to, although many of you may be just by virtue of the type of work that you do, but often we find that what maybe is less sort of at the forefront of our thinking about this has to do with how we are doing emotionally and how we are doing mentally. And so those two components, because, all of our thoughts and our feelings and our actions, we know those are all connected, that we can really intervene at any point in that circle to make a difference. So perhaps it has to do with really understanding my emotional health, and am I self-regulating when stress or anxiety is rising? And if not, what can I do to support myself in that way? And certainly with mental, like, I feel like we are just in our heads all the time, solving problems, thinking about, scenario planning, A versus B. It's just, I think the last 2 years, it's been a lot of in our heads. So being able to really just think about, what am I doing to give my brain a rest? And what am I doing to tap into maybe parts of my brain that I haven't really been thinking about, maybe more artistic parts, or just parts of my brain that maybe I don't use on a regular day-to-day basis. And then the spiritual component here is interesting. And of course, it doesn't mean any particular faith tradition. So this can mean anything you really want it to mean. And what, again, as we were doing this research, what was really abundantly clear is that most of us really need to feel meaning in our lives. And we can attach meaning in many, many different ways. And it's not a one size fits all. And sometimes returning to that meaning, perhaps if there is a faith tradition, getting a little more connected to that. Maybe it's being in nature, maybe it's looking at your kids, like whatever it is, but just this idea that if I start to see myself in the context of something greater than myself, that in and of itself can be somewhat sustaining. So I think these are some basic dimensions that really we can serve ourselves well by just taking a moment to think about, how am I really connecting to these dimensions? And when I'm ebbing or flowing, how connected am I to these?
Right. And we're going to invite you to do a little bit of self-reflection, and then we're going to have more conversation with one another.
Sorry, my watch just started talking. I don't know.
I was like, wait a minute, that sounds like Alexa. So on the handout that we sent you, and again, if you didn't print it, that's okay. We'll just leave it up on the screen, or I'll go back to the slide. But as coaches, we use lots of different tools. And one of the tools that we use are these very simple visual wheels. And in this particular wheel, it's looking at, again, this holistic perspective of all aspects of our well-being. And just to kind of what Stacy was speaking to, the mental aspect, the emotional aspect, our physical selves, our spiritual selves, and then also in here are a couple of other factors in our aspects of well-being, which is our environment. So literally the space that you're sitting in, what's around you, and then social. And we certainly know that social has been impacted, and relationships have been impacted, and team has been impacted by all of the changes that have happened over the last 2 years. And so the idea of this wheel is to just simply take a snapshot in right now, today, and just say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, and you can consider, okay, well, maybe we're taking this snapshot today. Maybe I'm considering myself over the last couple of weeks or the last month. You can choose what the time frame is, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how well am I caring for this aspect of my being? Right. And again, some days might be different than others. And we always say when we're doing any kind of awareness building that this is about, as much as you can, to bring curiosity to your experience, because this is not about self-judgment and criticism. This is more about noticing, oh yeah, I do pretty well perhaps in my physical well-being. What am I really doing that's helping my heart, or what's really helping me manage my emotions? And so just on that scale of 1 to 10 for each aspect here, we're going to invite you to we're just going to pause, and we're going to invite you to not overthink it, but just to consider on this scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not feeling very energized, not feeling very satisfied, and 10 being, oh, yep, I'm on top of that. I feel really great about how I'm taking care of this aspect of myself. Whatever that scale is, make a little circle around the number. So we're just going to pause and give you a moment to do that in each aspect. All right, and so I'm going to stop the share. And I'm curious if you would just connect the dots. If you connect the dots, so whatever number you put for mental and emotional and physical, just connect them around on the wheel. So I'm curious, how well would your wheel roll right now? I'm seeing some laughter and some head shaking, Stace.
Yeah, and we certainly understand that we may not be doing equally the same on each of those aspects, which is totally fine and completely understandable. And I think what might be illuminating is if you see a real dip, right? So if there's one particular aspect where the number is much lower than you might have expected. And again, as Alicia was saying, it's really not about being self-critical. It's just really curious, and to really think about if this number 2, 3, whatever it might be, we're a little bit higher, like 4 or 5, how might that be different, and what would it take to make that shift, and how might that matter? So I think that, you know, again, even if we're just looking at one or two of those dimensions and saying, I really think I'll give an example that is my own. I am pretty good about my physical health. I've been pretty good about trying to get to the gym, which is a really important thing for me, both mentally and physically. And I also just realized that I was just staying tuned into screens all the time, whether I was on my phone, whether I was watching TV, whether I was on my computer. And so a couple of months ago, I made the commitment to start reading novels. And I've always been a big reader, but I became very disconnected. So I started reading that. And especially at night before bed, just reading a few pages from a book. And what I realized is that it put me in a completely different headspace as I was getting ready for sleep. And part of it, I'm sure, is the screen aspect of it. I think part of it is my mental health, is just giving my brain something completely different to focus on. So I think that is just a very simple example of one small thing that made a difference. So as you look at the wheel, you may just isolate one or two of those dimensions and be really curious about how it might matter if you spent a little time just focusing on that.
Right. And we're gonna talk through each dimension briefly just to give some ideas about that. And we really want to pause here and we just want to hear a couple of things. One is just, what was it like to just literally to pause and just be reflective for yourself about these different aspects of your own well-being? Just what was it like to use this wheel? Just curious. Or what insight came from doing it? What did you notice? So Katie, helpful to see all the domains. Yes, please, Karen.
So I would say it was definitely out of the norm for me to stop and think about all of these areas at one time. Sometimes I'm reflective on one piece or another based on what's happening, kind of circumstantial, but to look at all of these at the same time, I was just kind of like, wow, I would not want to share my scores with anyone. And two, like, I really need to do some things to kind of get some balance or something in my life. But one of the things that I thought about also was that as a person who is, I think it's just knitted in my DNA to be a caretaker, that I often don't think about those aspects for myself. I think about them for other people. And when you're in a profession where you're a profession or in a leadership role where you're supposed to take care of your people, you want to treat your staff well, you want to, make sure that there's a good morale. Like, you tend to put those things first. And so just really curious about how you bring that balance. Or how do you get a sense of balance and bring some of that focus back to yourself?
Well, that is a great question, Karen. That's actually what we want to talk about next. And I'm curious, before we offer some possibilities, we would love to hear from you. So just a little bit more about, what are some ways that you have really paid some attention in meaningful ways to your own well-being that has gotten you through and has really contributed to your getting through this every day? Like, whether it's been in a mental capacity, a physical capacity, in any way. We're just curious. We'd love to hear a few thoughts about how have you done that as a leader? And we often emphasize the little things. So they don't have to be big things, but just what are some, we like to call them even micro practices, like things that you do in a minute, in 2 minutes, in 5 minutes that have really helped you. Just curious if anybody has any nuggets that you'd be willing to share before we offer some possibilities.
I would offer something that I would definitely say is not a healthy, but for me, an escape has been sugar.
Guilty.
Keeping a stock of potato chips, right? So it's kind of been those self-indulgent things that I could do that didn't require me to have to do a whole lot, but things that would give me that momentarily, that little escape to feel good. So I think I have sought a lot of my relief, and it definitely is starting to show through, refuge and food. Not that that's a healthy strategy that I'm offering to anyone.
Well, maybe it's about moderation, right? It's ways that we can really see ourselves kind of treating ourselves in moments where after a long week, having, a bowl of ice cream at the end of the day is something I can really look forward to. And of course, everyone makes their own decisions and choices about those types of things. I think the spirit of which you're sort of talking, Karen, is just so important, that when we are so focused on giving to others and sort of this flow going this way, whatever small ways we give back to ourselves in ways that really make us feel special. It might be a bowl of ice cream, it might be a potato chip, it might be a hot bath, but these are just different ways that we can really let ourselves know in meaningful ways, hey, you, I'm paying attention, I care about you, I'm here about your well-being, just like you're here about everybody else's well-being. And so I think those messages are really important that we can give to ourselves.
That's right. Well, and so how about we just share a couple of thoughts? Like we're not going to necessarily touch on every one of these, right? Because we want to make sure that all of you get a chance to share in the breakout rooms again before we finish today. And, we wanted to offer some possibilities. And like we said before, being able to consider what are small moments and what are longer moments. And again, from I think, Stacy, you said this when we were talking about looking at the overall dimension, but spiritual practice is really anything that is helpful for you to just step away or step out of the everyday and perhaps just have a moment of connecting with something a little bit bigger. Like, I'll just use an example. I was actually on the phone with Stacy the other day and we were doing some work things together, and all of a sudden this red-tailed hawk landed on the branch that's on the tree right outside of my office. And I just stopped everything and looked at it. And I was just filled with just a moment of, awe and wow, that's beautiful. And just really in a mindful, intentional way, just let that soak in and just notice that as a moment of connection. And so, we can also just notice through, it can be as simple as noticing through all of your senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, like just having moments where you're just coming fully present and kind of getting out of that everyday, what's in front of you. What else, Stace? Anything else on spiritual?
No, I think, again, we've just got on each of these, we have a few ideas. For mental, we talk about just taking a few breaths, which I think we're probably going to do together here in a moment. And, even just a little bit of technology timeout, as I was talking about, reading my book, it's just a way to kind of give my brain a rest. And recognizing how much technology time there is. My phone tells me, which is, I don't know if that's good or bad, because sometimes I'm a little bit like, that was a lot of hours every day on technology. And awareness is very powerful. And I think this mental one of the things that we really heard a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm not hearing it as much, and maybe we're just not asking the question as often. Folks seemed to get very into painting by numbers or doing all sorts of artistic things that maybe they hadn't done before, hadn't done as often before. And I think there's a lot of research that really supports just using the right and the left part of our brain can be really restorative. And we tend to be very much in our left side of the brain while we're problem solving and scenario planning and all the things, focusing on the bottom line and numbers and everything. So anything we can do to tap into that sort of artistic and creative side, even if we don't think of ourselves as artistic or creative people, can really just give our brains kind of a little bit of balance. And that can be really restorative as well.
Yeah, I know one of our executive CEOs that's one of our clients, she talks about at the end of the day, she has an iPad and she literally has one of those color programs on it, and she doodles. Like, she literally just doodles and makes all of these different drawings, and she does it. She's sitting in the den with her family, and it's just a way that she just allows herself to think about something other than all of what she had to deal with throughout the day. And it just helps her shift into a different mental space, which then, of course, helps the nervous system shift into a more rejuvenating and a more calm and more easeful place. Even if it's just downshifting a half a notch, it's still a half a notch, right? Because sometimes I think we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to go from, okay, I was just da, 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 and now I have to be like, ah. Well, no, if you're da 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 da, like, you might just say, okay, just da da da, right? Like, and and that's enough. So what else, Stace? I get
Yeah,
sidetracked.
no, I mean,
Katie's
I
doing
think
crosswords. I love that, Katie.
I love that too. Yeah, I think that point you just made, Alicia, is worth just reinforcing this idea that we do tend to be very all or nothing in our thinking. I know I can be this way. And so our ability to even just provide 5% more calm or 5% more peace in a moment can really make a very big and important difference. And we don't necessarily have to wait until we can take a week off and go away to the beach to have our restoration time, because first of all, that might not be realistic given all the realities of our lives. And second of all, we often can't wait. We need to find these practices that we can do as we go. And so these micro practices can be very powerful. I think it actually would be great to do breathing exercise, because this is definitely something that we talk about all the time. And it also has kind of a disproportionate positive effect in terms of supporting ourselves, right?
It does. I'm curious, does anybody do any kind of regular or semi-regular awareness of breath, breathing, mindfulness, focus, calming yourself,
That's some definite
transitioning?
yeses.
Beautiful. So just a simple, literally a simple, we're going to do a 2-minute practice of mindful breathing. And mindful literally just means how to bring as much of your attention as possible to what you are doing in the moment. And you'll probably notice your mind gets distracted, and that's okay. We're just gonna, for a couple of minutes, we're just gonna focus on our breath going in and out. So I would invite you just to put your feet on the floor. And I'm just turning sideways just because I want to emphasize that often when we're on screens, we are leaning and looking forward. And I would invite you for right now just to let your body posture relax back, maybe roll your shoulders back, open up your chest a little bit, and then just let your arms relax down. Let your neck get a little bit longer. And if you feel comfortable, I would invite you to close your eyes. And if you don't want to close your eyes, do something, whatever that is. It might be gazing out the window, finding a spot on the wall, on the desk, where you can literally just let your attention come inside to you. So you're just going to shift your attention from the outside in. And imagine that your attention is like a spotlight. And you get to shine the spotlight. You get to have the power of where that spotlight goes. And I'm going to invite you to shine that spotlight on your breathing. So just notice your breath. Just notice that you're breathing in and out through your nose or your mouth. Luckily, breathing happens automatically. And it's the one automatic process of the body that we have a little bit of control over. And so just noticing, are you breathing through your nose or your mouth? Notice the sensations of breath. Notice the movement of your chest, of your lungs. As you breathe in, perhaps there's some expansion. And as you exhale, just notice there's a release. See if you can just follow your breath into your perhaps upper belly. Or maybe even your breath goes all the way down to your lower belly. Or maybe you can invite the middle of your body and perhaps even your back and your ribs just to soften a little bit so that you can allow your breath to go just a little bit deeper. Be a little bit more full. And see if for the next 3 breaths, if you can just really follow that ebb and flow of your breath, the in and the out breath. As long and slow and deep as you want on the inhale, and as long and slow and full as you want on the exhale. And now just notice, just from that 1 or 2 minutes, just notice what effect there's been in any way in your thoughts, in your feelings, even in your body. Just notice if anything has shifted even a little bit. And then when you're ready, slowly and gently coming back into the room. Just following the sound of the bell, and you might just bring your full attention back into the room. You might yawn, you might need to stretch a little bit. That is perfect. And so I think what we want to do, I mean, I'm just mindful of our time, and we really want to give you the opportunity to connect with one another and to just have some conversation about some different aspects of self-care, whatever that means around this wheel: mental, emotional, spiritual, social, environmental. And so, Stace, you're off camera, so I'm going to assume you needed to step away for a minute. So
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I forgot I turned it off. I'm here. We're all set.
okay, you got the breakout rooms? All right.
Got it ready to go.
Great. So let's just, how long did you set them up for?
I think we have 9 minutes.
Great. So have a conversation about any of these practices that might be helpful for you. All right, welcome back, everyone.
I always love it when folks come back smiling. Makes you think that must have been a good conversation there in that little room. So that's awesome.
That's right. So we know that we only have a few minutes left, and the time always goes by so quickly. And we're just curious, just any thoughts, takeaways from today? What was helpful? Or what did you, any themes or any insights that came from this last breakout room in your conversation with one another? Please.
Yeah, Chris.
So I have to say, I was wondering how we would fill the time, and it's flown by. I think the balance of, the breakout rooms and what we're talking about is some heavy stuff, and it's nice to have the balance of big group, small group. And, there's some really, I was saying in the small group, some insightful things I can take from away from this that are, I think, going to make a difference for me.
Thank you, Chris. So glad to hear that.
I have a quick offering, I just want to share. I wasn't sure where it would really fit, but one of the things at Leadership Greater Hartford this year that we've been really proud of is that we've created more space for people to have actual time away, right? We were seeing that team members weren't taking vacation days because what are they going to do? Just sit at home? Like, doesn't feel like a good use of their time. Plus then they're just seeing emails pop in on their phone. So we actually added some extra office closure days and just said, but no one is working these days, which I think let team members let go of the guilt of actually stepping away, right? Yeah, maybe they weren't going to go do something fancy or go on a trip, but it was just added time. So that's a tangible tool that in our line of work is possible. It's not with the type of work that everyone does on the screen, but I share that as something that the board and staff, I think, has appreciated this year.
Larissa, I really appreciate that example. I was literally having this conversation with an organization, I think a couple of days ago, just about the reality of being able to step away or to turn off the email notifications or what have you. And I think sometimes, you know, the nature of the work, you're on call, the role, it can be very difficult to do that. And I'm also noticing sometimes it's pretty habitual. I know I find it in myself to just like pick up that phone and look at that email. And so I think for leaders to really bring attention to that and to give, you know, really explicit permission and even set expectations around setting some of those boundaries can be very powerful. And again, to your point, not always possible in every role. And I suspect more possible than we actually might think. It just requires, you know, the commitment on the part of both the leader as well as staff to really be willing to say, I will honor myself and set that boundary and be off for 3 hours at night or whatever it might be. It's a great example. So thank you for sharing. I think that's super inspirational.
Yes. Well, I'm aware of our time and we could probably continue talking with you, and we want to just honor everyone's time. Betsy's been putting in the chat the survey link. And Mayor, do you have any closing thoughts for us today?
I just want to take a minute and thank Stacy and Alicia for helping us to reflect a little bit on self-care today. And also just thank all of you. I know how busy you are, how full your plates are, and just sort of making that time to just step back and, if nothing else, just think about self-care for yourselves, in addition to, you know, all the care you do for others. And then just a reminder that we have a session specifically aimed at executive directors and CEOs coming up. That'll be January 19th, 9 to 10:30, and it'll be on kind of the role of staff care and effective leadership. So if you're interested, please sign up for that. And again, we'd really appreciate your thoughts in the survey. It's the first time we've done a session like this. We'd like to know what you liked, what we could improve in the future, because we really want to make sure that the sessions are meeting your needs. So that's all I have. Thanks for being here, everyone, and happy holidays to you all. I hope that they're as enjoyable as they can be, given all that we're going through. So thank you so
That's
much.
right. Take good care,
Yes.
everyone.